I am Brad Keelor. He is Jim Press. Next on Director's Cut, find out how he became the Hatfield hot dog hero and what beef he has with development in suburban Philadelphia.
Yo, 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 yo. 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 When I step up in the place, say yo, I step correct. Got you all in check. I got that.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keelor. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every week, every Wednesday, 7 days apart, until somebody tells me no or until I get fired, I sit down with a different GI member who has stories to tell the world. Some of them are personal, some of them are professional, all of them are fun. This week, as you may be able to see, we have entered into not the polar vortex, but the winter vortex. Both my guest and I are prepared for colder days, which I won't even say are ahead. They seem to be here. If you like what you are about to see today, and I think you will, you should click subscribe. You should click get notifications, and you will get notified every single time we post something to the YouTube channel, which is frequently. So today, my guest, I refer to him as maybe the funniest man in geotech. Sorry, Ken Stokey. It is Jim Press from Aterra Engineering Solutions in suburban Philadelphia. Jim, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And I really put a lot of heat on you there. Now, you know, it's the classic, say something funny.
Yeah, it's what can I do?
We'll get to some geotech jokes here in a little bit. We have to start with you the same way we start with everybody else. Describe your job in 45 seconds.
And you're counting?
Ish.
Okay. Yeah, so I would say my position with Aterra Solutions outside of Philadelphia is the geotechnical engineering elements of flood control infrastructure. So primarily embankment dams, levees, other flood control structures and their foundations. We're looking at, soil interactions with the retained water. We're looking at liquefaction potential, a lot of those elements, and sometimes just straight structural design. So I think the geostructural elements of my work are, predominantly what I'm looking at on a day-to-day, and then a lot of engagement with, municipal authorities who are the owners and stakeholders in the infrastructure, and, some federal level work that is also very exciting and, sometimes intimidatingly huge. But it's all, infrastructure is a big buzzword right now, and I'm excited to tell people over the holidays that, infrastructure bills directly related to what I do.
You need a little button that says I am shovel ready or something like that.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you about not the infrastructure word that you used, but liquefaction. And I'm sure there are people out there watching this that are like, wait a minute, this guy's in Pennsylvania. Why is he worried about that? Tell us about liquefaction in the Philadelphia area.
I would tell you, you got to worry about it everywhere you are. As I think we, noted in Michigan, you can have instances of static liquefaction where, it's not necessarily related to seismicity. If you're dealing with saturated, loose sands and, cohesion with soils, then that's an issue. It's something that we always want to vet out. I mean, it's a standard practice for earth and embankment dams to look at the dams and the foundation, but also especially the dams. And I think that was kind of the issue that we saw in Michigan. So, you never want to let that behavior go unmitigated or unnoticed. So that's, it's more than checking the box, I guess, as I would say, that's important. And then just other, potential for internal erosion inside of your soils. And so all of that is tied in together in my mind.
A perfect bonus question answer there. So we have to do some fun stuff on Director's Cut as well. And we get to that right away just to suck those viewers in so they don't leave us. Tell everybody about the worst haircut you ever received.
Yeah. So the worst haircut, my initial answer to this was like any of the 2 or 3 haircuts that I gave myself over the course of 2020. You know, never done that before, and probably will never do it again. But they were tough times.
A lot of party in the back.
Yeah, and probably still is. We're not getting that shot in this interview. But I can say the worst one I received when I thought about it some more. To preface it, my mom is a cosmetologist, hairstylist, and up until I went to college, no one else had ever cut my hair. And so, freshman year of college, waited until I came back on break. That's when I would get my haircuts. Sophomore year, decided to do something, funny. I probably lost a bet or something. My roommate actually shaved my head. And, that in and of itself is fine. I'm like, oh, really short hair. I'll wear hats, whatever. But then I got home and my mom looked at it. She goes, "This is the most misshapen haircut I've ever seen. Who did this? Do they need glasses? Like, what is going on here?" And, she took some pictures to show me the back. These are like skewed angles, and just hair is like, here's a patch of hair that's way longer than the other. I'm like, what? And I was going out and talking to people like this. So I don't know why I did it. It's definitely the worst one I've ever received.
That's great, though. And I think everybody thinks that I prepare these questions in advance after talking to the people. These are totally unprepared. I had no idea that your mom was a cosmetologist or that you had shaved your head in college. So it just all works out in Director's Cut. So we have to ask you a little bit about your work in grad school too, and you did some stormwater infiltration research there. So after doing that and now being out in the real world, what advancements do you think are most needed in that area?
Yeah. So I think, my advisor, Dr. Andrea Welker, who you've had on this very program.
Previous guest, yes.
Previous guest. Yeah. She's a huge advocate of the infiltration capacity of, bioretention basins and rain gardens. As we in our grad program, we're moving toward promoting green infrastructure for stormwater management. So I think something that kind of flies under the radar and, absolutely should be more focused on is the capacity of our, engineered soil media to retain stormwater that's, funneled in through your drainage areas, and to actually like provide a positive, impact on an ecosystem. So the rain garden itself, you fill it up with plants that are, kind of able to take that inundation and actually remove some of the nutrients. So you get that benefit of it, but also just you're managing the stormwater instead of diverting it. So we see, in a parking lot, for example, one of my research sites was just a small parking lot of an elementary school in Abington. And one of the things we found was that, if you funnel that drainage area, instead of going to the adjacent creek where you are taking all those oils and greases off vehicles, like take that, let the rain garden manage it, you find that your effluent stormwater, is much higher quality from, a content perspective, but then your quantity is managed because you're allowing water to infiltrate. You have groundwater recharge capability, and you have some beautiful plants that are able to grow out of that. Mm-hmm. So, my role at the time, my research was sort of about vetting our rain gardens and how much, infiltration they could manage and how to test that. So we came up with some things, and I think, as Villanova continues to publish research, we're making that case that these are really important pieces of green infrastructure.
Oh, that's great. So anybody who follows you on Twitter, which I would say that you should because it's enjoyable, might know that you are the Hatfield Hot Dogs hot dog hero, or you were. I'm not sure which tense to use there anymore. So how did you become the hot dog hero, and what did it do to your life? How did it change your day-to-day existence?
Yeah, I mean, this is the formative story that, would be the center of my biopic or biopic, however. This was huge for me. I grew up, outside of Philadelphia with family, and out of Philadelphia my entire life, and have been a big Phillies fan. And going to the ballpark, I associated going to the ballpark with getting like a hot dog or a few, and that was kind of just a thing. Like, it wasn't my favorite food or anything, but I loved baseball. I loved eating the hot dogs there. And so when I was in college at Villanova, we were very close to the ballpark, and you'd get advertised the student specials and also the dollar hot dog nights. What I found, and this was really not intentional, but it was just what would happen on dollar hot dog night, was that I would come in with, $20 dedicated to concessions, and some people, they might get a beverage and maybe some crab fries. I'd pretty much use that $20 for hot dogs. And if we went into extra innings, it was extra hot dogs. Typically would average a hot dog an inning, maybe more. And it was just kind of like, they let you buy 3 or 4 at a time. You bring them back, you peel them out of the foil. They're just very appealing in that way. And so that was kind of a thing I was known for. It got to a point, I saw someone had like a hot dog hat, and it was branded with the Hatfield logo. I was like, how do I get one of those? Like, that seems like it would suit me really well. So I just tweeted at, the Hatfield hot dog account, and I said, hey, like, you have your dollar hot dog night coming up in like a month, and to prepare to really show out, I probably need one of these hats. Like, what's it going to take? Like, I'm willing to buy it. I'm willing to pretty much do whatever is necessary. And the person who ran the social media account just responded like, we're going to need some testimony to see if you really are worthy of this hat. So we're having some fun. The support that I received from my online friends in that moment was just truly, flattering, touching, as they all chimed in to say, like, listen, this guy's got a thing for hot dog night. Like, it's weird. If anyone deserves it, he does, but like, maybe don't boost his ego by and so at that point, the response was overwhelming. They sent me the hat, and I'll put it on camera because it's kind of, this is
very
like,
stylish.
Yeah. And this was what I wanted. This was kind of the crux of it. What I get more than I bargained for was then, I'm on social media at these games posting the hot dogs as I eat them, taking videos, dedicating, a hot dog to friends, family, loved ones.
As you do.
Yeah. And so, you go like, oh, hot dog number 7 tonight is going out to like my 8th grade computer teacher who taught me that, you can type without looking at the keys. And, just.
That's great. So I do have one question about this as a follow-up. I'm disturbed that they limit the hot dog purchases at one time at the Phillies games. We were talking before about dollar night at the Orioles games, and the Orioles do not care. You could walk up and you could buy 12, 15, 20, whatever you can carry at one time, and they will let you do it. So this worries me a little bit.
Well, at first I felt that as an injustice, and I was like, well, come on, you have them right there. Like, I don't want to make so many trips. But then I realized, like, it is actually very popular, and it becomes like an equity system where, if I take all the hot dogs, the next person simply just won't have access to them until they cook more. They do have to put reasonable limits, and I came to accept that. I came to see that as kind of a beautiful system of justice in the ballpark.
It probably cuts down on food waste, too, now that I say this and think about it, because how many idiots go and buy 15 and then don't finish 5 of them? And yeah.
And little known factor, too, is that they go cold pretty quickly because, if they're having this in April can still be pretty cold. And important to note, if you want to get into this game, is like you'll get very dehydrated from all the salt in those hot dogs. You want the jumbo water bottles. You absolutely need those.
I like that. Tips and tricks. So if anybody out there is watching, you can email Jim and he will tell you how you can become maybe not a team's hot dog hero, but your family's hot dog hero, or one to yourself, which is even more important.
Yeah.
So we back to your professional experiences here, which, I mean, what is the hot dog hero story if not professional? But what is the most frightening professional experience you have had to this point?
You see that's a great question. I would say during a geotechnical site investigation in November in Tennessee, not this November, but a few years ago, I was out on a site. It was snowing, which was kind of odd for November. It was a good amount of snow, and there was a lot already on the ground. So visibility was low. I'm doing logging. I'm going back and forth for, equipment and what have you. And it's very cold because of the snow. And I am all bundled up and I have my gloves on and I'm kind of like writing something down and I feel like a tug on my, I think it was like the interface that I had created between my jacket and my glove to like stay very warm. I just felt a tug there. And then suddenly like my glove is gone. And it was very jarring. And I'm like, whoa, okay, now my hand is freezing and I don't know where my glove just went. And I turn around and there is just this big dog who just showed up out of nowhere, stole my glove, looked me like dead in the eyes, say like, "You want this back?" and then ran off. And I did want it back, and I was very afraid that my hand was gonna freeze. So I followed the dog down the slope because he looked friendly. He had a collar, he's someone's dog. And I see him, and he's just another dog that he's playing with, and they start like tossing the glove around, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna get this back. And, so you shouldn't really approach random dogs who, have the capacity to like steal things from you. That's kind of scary in its own right.
But he looked friendly, you said. I really wasn't sure where that story was going to go. I thought maybe there was going to be a landslide or something, but it is a cautionary tale about dogs stealing your gloves when it's really cold outside.
Yeah, I was less afraid of like what the dogs might do and me just like, my hand, like I only have one pair of gloves. That was dumb on my part. Should have a backup pair in case of dogs.
Well, a message to all our viewers then: take backup gloves, especially in Tennessee, maybe. So the other question that we ask everybody who comes on Director's Cut is, how did you first get involved in ASCE and GI?
Yeah, that's a great question, and of course I have a story for it. So, as you go through undergrad in civil engineering, obviously your professors are making you aware of the body that is ASCE and all of the wonderful things that, joining that as a student can get you, going out to conferences, the research opportunities, submit your papers, journal articles, etc. And so I think it was my junior or senior year undergrad. We had a GI student night on campus, which we're very fortunate to host because it brings all the local, DVGI professionals in, have a chance to have a nice dinner and also like hear their presentations. So that was probably the first time I like heard and got involved with something for the Geo-Institute. I volunteered to present my research at that time. So my undergrad research was also stormwater and infiltration testing. And so I, was given the opportunity to like do a 10-minute talk. And I think it was like a strict 10 minutes, right? Because everybody wants to eat, do the presentations, kind of get out on a weeknight. And so I had like 8 minutes of good research that I could present. And then I thought, because, of course, I'm always coming up with these silly like geo jokes and that just like comes into my head because of the way that I am as a person. And I figured it would be really wise to just, in the same way that I'm burdened with these horrible jokes, like burden the audience here with just truly terrible stuff. And so I'm like up there and I was debating to the last minute, like whether this would be a receptive crowd for just geotech jokes. And I see, you've got students from Villanova and also like other campuses. You've got, some of my very professors who are about to be embarrassed to like have taught me. And then just, the professionals in the area. And so I get done with my research and I'm like, also, I have some jokes. And I see people kind of look and they're like, the tone has just shifted dramatically and also like uncomfortably. I just see, as soon as I begin to rattle off the first one, which was my favorite and still remains my favorite, there are students that are like, oh, this so much secondhand embarrassment is in their faces. And so, of course, I have those jokes handy and new ones.
So you got to go for that top one now that you mentioned it. Let's go.
So that one was just, what do you call the least interesting tree in the forest? The boring log.
Yes, it's perfect.
And yeah, so for me, I'm like, I am just flush with pride in that one, and the reaction, crickets would have been welcome in that moment. So,
I think the first time I knew you existed, you put out a tweet about a summer job you had where you were handling samples, and you said every time a new one came in, you said, "Here's another huge block of rock." And I was like, this is, I have to know who this guy is, because that was perfect.
To think that that moment would have led us all the way here some, 8 years later, whatever.
The world's a strange place.
It truly is.
So this question would have a lot more zing to it if you were about 15 years older, I think, or maybe even a little more than that. So obviously, you went to Villanova for both undergrad and grad school, and I went to St. Joe's. And for those of you who are not in the Philadelphia area, this is for a long time a very big rivalry, especially in basketball, but it is in other things too. St. Joe's has not been holding up their end of the deal for about the last 15 years, we'll call it. And that's most of the time, Jim, that you have been aware of what's been happening in the sporting universe. So for you, do you have any St. Joe's Villanova rivalry stories?
It's tough. I think when I ran the stats in my lifetime, there are only 4 St. Joe's wins that have occurred.
It's been bleak, but 2003 was magnificent. If you want to look one up.
Yeah, that's it was a game that would happen every year. I was on campus. I know I went to a few. I watched the Hawk flapping. I was like, do they really have to flap the whole time? So that was,
you got to earn your scholarship.
Yeah, you absolutely have to earn it. When I played rugby for Villanova, we lost notably to St. Joe's. I think probably every time that I played them. Villanova has gone on since I graduated to become a premier rugby team in the area. But at that time, I think St. Joe's had us.
Thanks for adding that at the end, that things have improved and St. Joe's is inferior at something else. Appreciate it.
Well, but yeah, I think what Villanova did when I was in college, it felt unreal for them to be that good and then have sustained it for so long.
It is pretty crazy because, it's not, for those of you who don't know out there, Villanova is not a massive academic institution. What do you guys have, about 6,000 undergrads, maybe a little more than that?
Yeah, maybe like a little more, but it's not big.
It's always exciting, too, I think, in that whole area, whenever one of the big 5 teams is doing something special. I remember 2004 when St. Joe's was like 3 seconds from making it to the Final Four. It kind of took over everything, and you're getting emails from Villanova people and Penn people and stuff, and they were actually happy for us, which doesn't happen a whole lot. So it was a good time. So one of the things within GI that we're big on, obviously everybody knows about our student programs. We try to get involved in mentoring as much as we can as well. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about one or two of your mentors and how they've impacted your career. Even at its early stage as you're starting out.
Yeah. So I think the mentorship that I experienced as a student was so huge in like leading me toward geotech, specifically, but also just kind of assuring me that there was a path that like made sense outside of college and outside of what it was very like hypothetical at the time. Because up until I took soil mechanics, I don't think I had really thought of what you would do with the engineering curricula. Like all of these things were very, I don't want to say impractical, but you'd learn a lot of structural or a lot of like the mechanics of materials. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm still kind of confused. Like I don't, is it sufficient to know this, that, whatever? So my first, really strong mentor, Dr. Kristen Sample-Lord was my first professor who taught, soil mechanics my junior year. And I was just hooked on that class from the get-go because, I think, anyone who is a geotech professor, kind of gets that it's a weirdly tight-knit community. Mm-hmm. And there's like a framing in the history of geotech where you have like Terzaghi and then everyone who's ever learned from him, who's learned from that person. And so you have like a level of uniformity of experience where, everyone's teaching it to the way that these theories were kind of developed empirically and then immediately makes it practical. Like, you're saying mm-hmm. you would do this with your vertical effective stress, and it's because, for example, at this site, this is what it would look like, and this is how you'd analyze this boring log, and you could have different interpretations. So I think that mentorship and that first class was kind of the knowledge that this was less of like a science to the engineering, less of an exact answer, and more of like an investigative process where you take the data and you interpret it. And I was kind of hooked on that. Like nothing in civil engineering had really piqued my interest as much as what was, capable and what you could do with geotech. And so, I got really into that. And, Dr. Welker then was my advisor for grad school. I think her passion for the field and also for how you can apply it and how to like educate. I think she was a very powerful example of keeping students engaged by keeping, your exam material even like very practical and relevant and, to describe not just like a problem, but like the site and your constraints and, keeping things within the realm of context. It made me like open my perspective in a way where, if you tell me like, I have a steel beam and it's loaded vertically with 5 kips and, where's it going to bend? Okay, of course, important. But to say, we have a 10-acre site in the woods of, Wisconsin. And so you're dealing with the frost depth and you're dealing with like list out everything you need to know. That's just a different way of thinking. And I think that's what kind of hooked me.
That's cool. And I always think it's kind of wild, too, that this is a discipline where there are people who you can still call up or email who had personal interactions with Carl Terzaghi or Arthur Casagrande or Ralph Peck. Obviously, he passed away much more recently. I am not aware, for example, of any mathematicians who practiced or knew Archimedes, for example. It's just there's a much closer connection to the people who kind of founded this discipline, and that's very cool. So that is great answer to that one too. We have 2 questions left, and this is the other one we teased at the beginning of the show. What is on your personal Philadelphia area infrastructure wish list? I think for me, anytime I would go up there, the Schuylkill Expressway to me was always a nightmare. I am sure some engineer in the 50s thought it was genius. For those of you who have never been, it's kind of on a lot of hillsides. There's no room for expansion. It's 2, maybe 3 lanes each way at the most. There are exits on both sides, which they've improved a little bit in recent years, but it's a little bit of the Wild West as freeways go. So for you, Jim, what's the top of your list? If the Philadelphia area could improve some infrastructure stuff, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think 76 in the Schuylkill, obviously, that is a huge one that everyone experiences coming in and out of the city. I don't want to be pessimistic and say, they'll never solve that. I think my, primary encouragement is at that point to embrace SEPTA, embrace the public transportation. But it's not the biggest gripe I have with our situation in, the Philadelphia area. I think what's only been highlighted in recent, months with Hurricane Ida is our propensity for severe flooding, and just the level of development that, of course, is common to cities across the United States, but especially in a much older city relative to those like Philadelphia. We've been around since the beginning of the country. We have some very ancient infrastructure with regard to the combined sewers and overflow systems. So we're kind of already at a disadvantage, and we've, developed around what were floodplains and are now like, riverfront properties. And so we have a lot of things kind of against us in the sense that a lot of gray infrastructure that leads stormwater, to some pretty powerful flows. We don't have a lot of places for it to go. We saw the Vine Street Expressway was like literally a canal in September, which is, it's tough to see because you then hear, this new gigantic building has been approved to be built like in this previously undeveloped side of riverfront property. And, I don't think anything in my professional career has led me to be like anti-development, but I do think from my academic experiences and research and stormwater, I think we need to develop much smarter with regard to our stormwater impacts, and kind of acknowledging the fact that flooding is forecasted to continually get worse. So how are we addressing that with our designs? Where I live, actually outside the city in Conshohocken, was a prime example. Like, I walk around, the banks of the Schuylkill, basically, which is where this is built, and everything's on a hill. I'm fortunate enough that in September I was up, 9 streets from the river. We didn't get the kind of flooding that put people out of their homes. But then I see, okay, we're going to continue on these same like flooded commercial office buildings, and your parking garages were underwater, your cars are all totaled, and we need to think a little bit more about that's going to happen more frequently. What kind of green infrastructure can we embrace? What kind of actual management? I don't think I can't exactly like start picketing to reclaim our floodplain. But I can say, when you build something, how are you managing the stormwater in kind of like a way that is not just a diversion, a way that's not just, let's cross our fingers and hope we don't get that flood. Because, I think the most unfortunate and serious element of it is, even though we can be prepared for these storms, like, there is so much property damage and even loss of life that still occurs in, a heavily developed and urbanized area. And it's a result of flooding. So, we can't fight the forces of nature, but in many ways we can better prepare for them and kind of, contextualize all of our development in terms of this thing that wasn't here before, this thing that might have been, land that could soak up water. How do I offset the fact that it's here now without making the flooding worse? And I think that's our goal.
I think the below grade freeways, I mean, you mentioned the Vine Street Expressway in Philadelphia, and there are several in Detroit as well. And I think last year we saw really dramatic flooding there. There were people with jet skis out on, I think, I-96 outside of Detroit. And, I guess the rebuttal to that for a lot of people is, well, that's a 100-year event or whatever. But, we start to get to the point where we have a 100-year event every 3 years. That's a significant problem. And to go back to the Philadelphia example, that Vine Street Expressway, that's a vital corridor. I mean, to anybody who's been to that area, that cuts right through Center City. You get from West Philadelphia, or University City, I guess, to Jersey that way, and everything in between. It's wow. So I think you're very prescient there. A huge issue for all metro areas, but Philadelphia with its hills and stuff. I mean, so you're probably right. My Schuylkill Expressway gripes are just gripes. Yours are actual, real, large, big picture issues. So we got to end with something fun after all that serious talk. As you can see behind Jim, that is not his actual Christmas tree. It is a tree that someone photographed at some time that he put in the background. And I've got my Sleeping Bear Dunes National Park in the winter here. It is rapidly approaching the holiday season. What is on your holiday playlist? Do you have set times when you listen to holiday music, or are you the type of person that can listen to Bing Crosby in March?
So I feel like March is excessive. I've pretty much decided that, as soon as we get to the daylight savings period and it's dark at 4:30, it's appropriate. You can bring on the holiday cheer, whatever it takes. I think we should be kind to ourselves. And I'm pretty much as soon as Thanksgiving hits, I'm ready for Christmas music. I really enjoy it that much, and so I'll listen. I listen during the workday, listen in the evening, and I pretty much enjoy all of it. But there are some staples that I think are very important to me that have like outsized significance. One of the ones that I don't know if everyone's on board with is Joni Mitchell, "The River." I think that one is a perfect Christmas song, and I don't know why. Just the fact that it mentions Christmas, that's
all you need.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful, beautiful song. I keep a copy, or I keep the CD of the Charlie Brown Christmas, the Vince Guaraldi trio, just the jazz standards. Those like kind of lo-fi voices singing over the instrumentals. That just feels like Christmas to me. And then I think my favorite, or just the one that I need a lot of, is the Grinch. You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. I think that number one, that song and that register is just so wonderful and fun to like try to imitate. Also, the guy who sings it, his name is Thurl Ravenscroft. That's the best name of all time. That is.
I like that. I think the only other Thurl I've ever heard of was Thurl Bailey that played for the Jazz in the 80s and 90s.
That's a name that needs to like have a resurgence. That's a good first name.
I will report though that I'm not going to be the person who does that by like naming my children that or anything like that.
Yeah, with great power comes great responsibility. Whatever.
So that's a pretty good little playlist there. I think one of my favorites that's a little bit offbeat is Sufjan Stevens, one of Michigan's finest, has a 5-disc Christmas box set that I love busting out at this time of year every year. It's got some classics on there. It's got some original songs. I think it's from about 2005, but it's also some good listening. So, Jim, you survived all 10 questions, and you did it with flying colors. We heard about your hot dog heroism. We heard about how you don't care about St. Joe's, and we heard a lot about stormwater. I think that's a successful day. So again, if you liked what you saw today out there in viewer land, click subscribe, click get notifications. We always will let you know whenever we post anything new to the channel, which is very frequently. So Jim, thanks a lot for doing this today.
Thank you for having me.
I think this was really great, and it was very spirited as we move into the holiday season. And so all our viewers out there, we will see you next week.
Hey, you know we come through to rock the disco jam. The fact that you all in check, throw your hands up in the air and never disrespect. The fact that you all in check.
So wait, do you consider yourself a hot dog aficionado?
Yes. But I need to preface any discussion of my, liking, enjoyment of hot dogs with the fact that I'm not like a competitive hot dog eater. I'm not
right.
That, it was never about the speed at which I was consuming hot dogs.
You got to let it breathe. Just enjoy.
Yeah. And it was a little bit about the quantity, but not in a way that I thought was like, this is a despicable amount of hot dogs for a human being to eat. It was more like, they had dollar hot dog nights, and I'm already coming into the stadium with, like $20 for concessions. So, if you're out there at a game and you're doing a dog or two per inning, then, that can add up quickly. And baseball it's one of those things. You sit there and you snack and you just watch it, and before you know it, you've had 15 hot dogs.
I don't think that's the case for most people. So wait.